Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the how to deal with the situation of the world. Surprise, surprise. One of the important things in life is always to be able to take the reality as it is around us and use that as a kind of feedback mechanism or a way of understanding the Dhamma, because we all know that the Dhamma is about reality. The Dhamma is about life. Yeah. And one of the kind of biggest difficulties, I think, often is to be able to relate real life to the Dhamma. We tend to make the Dhamma too theoretical. The Dhamma is something that we think about. Dhamma is one thing, and then real life becomes something else. And that is the problem. And when we do that, then we are surprised by life going wrong, or life going the wrong way, or we're surprised by life actually following the teaching of the Buddha. Yeah, we are surprised that when things actually go as the Buddha said they would go. So we need to be realistic about our existence. That the more realistic you are, the more aligned you are with the Dhamma, the easier your life is going to be, regardless of the problems in the world. And I understand that right now there are some serious economic problems in Sri Lanka. I don't really know so much about the details, but I have seen that there are some problems with even being able to, get hold of medicines and even some food items and these kind of things. And of course, that causes a lot of suffering in the country. And as always, it causes more problems for the poor, but it creates problems for everyone, obviously, in that kind of situation. And I feel privileged. I've been to Sri Lanka many times. I know what Sri Lanka is like. And I must admit, I love to travel to Sri Lanka. And it's a very beautiful country and very nice people. And so that for that reason, when I hear about these troubles in Sri Lanka, it also touches me, because when you've been to a place, you have an understanding for what it is like. And that puts you in touch with the problems that are happening there. But of course, it's not just Sri Lanka. It is happening kind of around the world now. You have wars going on in Europe. We haven't really had any wars in Europe, proper big wars like this, for a long, long time. And of course, you have had your wars in Sri Lanka. And there's problems everywhere. So because there's problems everywhere, so many issues going on, actually we need to get hold of the Dhamma and really reflect on the Dhamma in a deeper way. Now, one of those really things that really stands out to me in the suttas. I remember towards the very end of the Buddha's life, you have the marvelous Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is found in the long discourses of the Buddha, the Digha Nikaya, number 16. And of course, this sutta, it talks about the very last events before the Buddha's passing away. Yeah, and because it is the last events of the Buddha's passing away, it means that these are really important events. Yeah, when the Buddha knows that he's about to disappear once and for all, he's going to leave the Sangha behind, he's going to leave the Upasakas behind, and because everyone is going to be left behind, he knows that he has to kind of give some basic guidance to the Sangha. It's almost as if he has to summarize his teachings towards the very end. Yeah. So these are some of the most powerful things that come out from the Buddha, the way he summarizes entire teachings, often in very short little phrases, short little paragraphs. This comes out in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And of course, we all know one of the things that he says there, the last words of the Buddha, according to the story, is Vaya Dhamma Sankara Appamadena Sampadeta. Vaya Dhamma Sankara Appamadena Sampadeta. The last words of the Buddha. And you can imagine the Buddha, the greatest spiritual teacher in human history, the greatest spiritual genius that humankind has ever seen, by a long way, in my estimation. These are his last words. This is how he summarizes his entire teaching. Yeah, this is the summary. This is the essence. This is the pith, if you like, of the teachings of the Buddha. And that first thing it says, Vaya Dhamma Sankara, all phenomena, everything in the world has the nature to Vaya, what does vaya mean? Vaya means to vanish, to disappear, to fade away, to go into nothingness. Everything in the world, all things around us, has the tendency, has the nature to always fade away, to vanish and disappear. This is the summary of the Buddha's teaching at the very end. And then he says, appamadena sampadeta, which means something like carry on with heedfulness, or achieve success by being heedful, or something to that effect. So the Vayadhamma Sankara is like a summary of the teaching. And appamadena sampadeta is like the path, the practice that we have to do. The two sides of the Dhamma, the theory, the problem that we are facing, and then the solution through the path that he was teaching. This is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. But have we learned that? Even though this is probably the most important teaching of the Buddha, have we really understood what the Buddha means by this? And the answer is usually no. We know how to say it in Pali. Even I know how to say it in Pali, even though I never went to a Buddhist school or anything like that, because it's such a famous word. We know how to say it in Pali, but do we really grasp it? This is really, really important, obviously. And the answer is usually no, we haven't grasped it. And the reason you can see why people haven't grasped it is because when the world goes wrong, when the economy goes down, when there is another war, when there's a famine, when there is all these refugees around the world, all of this myriad of things, the natural disasters that we have, all of these kind of things, when it goes wrong, what do? We say, what's going on? What's happening? This isn't supposed to happen. We haven't really taken it on board. We think it should be otherwise. And that idea of thinking it should be otherwise, of being surprised when it happens, well, this is a really massive problem. And really the reason is because we haven't reflected properly. We haven't taken on board the basic essence of the Buddha's teachings fully. We haven't really thought about it. We know the words, but we haven't taken it inside. So these teachings like Vayadhamma Sankara is something we need to think about a lot. And for that reason, it's a very good theme to talk about during a Dhamma talk, because it is the sort of thing that gets us closer to reality. So next time there is an economic crash, next time there is a natural disaster, you say, oh yeah, I expected that. Oh, no big surprise. I expected that to happen. And then you are on the right track. But if we think about this in the right way, it's not just that we expect it. I like to use the idea of expect the unexpected these days. Expect the unexpected, because unexpected things happen all the time. But so if we think about this, it is not just that we start expecting the unexpected, but it actually changes our whole life. It changes our way of thinking. It changes what we value. It changes what is important to us. Our whole attitude to the world actually becomes different. This is kind of the important point, because if we know that the world outside is inherently unreliable, and this is kind of the point, it is inherently unreliable. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but we have no idea what it's going to do next. And that inherent unreliability makes it kind of yucky. It makes it uninteresting. There is no real goal in that world outside. We're not actually heading anywhere. It is just more of the same. You solve one problem and there's one other problem behind it waiting to be resolved. There is no end there. There is no purpose. There is nothing. And you start to see the emptiness of the world when you start looking at it in this way. And of course, if there is nothing to be found, nothing of interest in the world outside, well, then you have to look inside to find the world that is really interesting. Because in the world inside, well, there is a real refuge, because we have a degree of control of the world inside. In the world inside, we can act well, we can do the right thing, we can live in a good way, we can create all those qualities that we can take with us into the future. And we create the future by how we live within right now. That is where we create the future, not by trying to create a world outside, which by definition always is going to be imperfect. So if you want to create the future, and this is what I was saying before in the meditation practice, is that don't think about the world, because you cannot create a future anyway, because that world is always going to be inherently problematic. So if you want to create a future, what you have to do, sit down now, let go of that world, and start to build up good qualities within. The peace, the quiet within, the stillness, the mindfulness, the kindness, the goodness, the compassion, even the metta. And as you develop these good qualities within, that is when you are developing your future. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that is how it works. So one of the problems when we have a big problems like you're having in Sri Lanka now, one of the great issues that people often get very angry. And I've seen that you have had protests going on in Sri Lanka, people getting out in the streets. And sometimes when people go into protest, sometimes it turns into violence. This is the nature of these kind of protests. When many angry people come together, the outcome very often is violence and anger and this very negative, powerful negative energy, which can lead people astray in very, very bad ways. So please, I ask you, don't get angry. You can argue that, sure, there are probably people that you deserve, who deserve that you get angry with them. Probably very likely. And I know that there are some people who probably blame the Sri Lankan government and they say that the government has to step down and all of these kind of things. And then there are other people who maybe blame the international institutions who haven't been supporting the Sri Lankan economy as maybe they should have. And so there's always someone to blame. There's always all of these things going around. And it's kind of natural. You can understand why people get angry. But there is no solution in anger. The only result of anger is more bad things happening. On top of the economic problems you have already, you might end up with violence in society. You might end up with kind of really, really big disturbing things that end up taking even more lives than the problems that you have because of medicines or whatever. The solution is never anger. The solution, rather, in this kind of case, is, of course, if things can change for the better, it's wonderful. But very often the solution is just, from a personal point of view, is to try to understand what is going on and to have a sense of compassion for all the people who are touched by this. And of course, you have a sense of compassion for all the victims in your own country. And probably everyone is a victim to some extent of these difficult economic times. But then you realize that even the people in power, actually, there's no point in getting angry with them either. Because remember, one of the beautiful Buddhist ideas is the idea of non-self. And because of the idea of non-self, it means that nobody is really in charge. Nobody really knows what they are doing here. If there is no self, then who we are, our personalities, the way we behave in the world comes from conditions and causes in the past. It comes from the circumstances, yes. So in a sense, we are the victim of our own past. We are the victim of our own habits. We are the victim, in a sense, of our own personality. If I say to people, sometimes I like to say to people, well, try to imagine stepping out of your own personality. And of course, that's impossible. And yet, where does that personality come from? And that personality that you have comes from your habits in the past, maybe a past life, maybe earlier on in this life. But all of these things working on you and working on you in this way. And then you become this person you are because of these causes and conditions working on you. But to what extent are you responsible? And of course, the Buddha's answer is at the end of the day, you're not responsible at all. You have been formed into this by all these forces that are much larger than you. And even the inner forces within you, they too ultimately go back to cause and conditions. And then when you start to see people like the people in government or the people maybe in the international institutions or whoever it is that you blame, you might feel like blaming here, you realize that in a sense, they too are victims. They are maybe in one way, they are even, the they are victims just like every one of us, even if they abuse their situation in a very bad way. Maybe they are corrupt, maybe they do all kinds of bad things. Still, they are victims in a very real sense. And of course, if you are a corrupt person and if you steal from the population of your own country, which is usually what happens in corruption, the consequences of that are terrible. Yeah, many of these people, they will have very bad consequences in the future. Just because you make a lot of money in the short term, in the longer term, the consequences are going to be far, far worse for you. You are a victim of not having the strong qualities that are required to be a leader. And if you haven't got the strong qualities that are required to be a leader, you're going to succumb. You're going to succumb to the forces of corruption, the forces of all of these negative things working on you. So Buddha uses this beautiful simile in the suttas. He says that it is just as if there is a sick man walking down the road, and he's far away in the wilderness somewhere. There is no village in front or behind. There is no doctor available. There is no medicine or suitable food for this man to eat. And yet he is sick. He's ill. He's gravely in trouble. And then another man sees this man walking on the road. How do you feel for a person like that? And the answer is the way you feel, of course. You have a sense of compassion, because it's not this man's fault that he is suffering. It is not his fault that he is ill. He's just walking along this road without having any kind of support. And so then this other man thinks, oh, I really hope he finds someone. He finds a doctor. He finds someone to help him. He gets some medicine. He gets some suitable food to eat, etc., etc. Otherwise, he's going to end up with death or something similar very soon. And in this simile, you can imagine that the medicine is like the Dhamma, yeah, the Dhamma for the sick person. Because the Buddha says it's exactly the same, he says, for a person who does bad actions. If a person is a bad person who does all kind of negative things or whatever, they are like a sick person. They have no idea what they are doing. They're walking along this road without any medicine, without any food, without anyone to look after them. Because the medicine is the Dhamma that makes you think in the right way. The doctor who can support you, well, that tends to be the Buddha. And the people around you who can also give you support, well, that's all your Kalyana Mittas, all the people who are supposed to help you to see things in the right way. And so this is the problem for these people. They haven't got that right understanding. They're not seeing things in the right way. They may be Buddhist, but they're only Buddhist in a very superficial way, not Buddhist in a deep way, whereby your actions, your way of thinking, your life is informed by Buddhist values. And that is the problem. So when you see people in your life who misbehave in this way, who maybe even are part of destroying the economy to some extent of a country, have compassion for them, because they have no idea what they're doing. They're causing suffering for everyone. They're causing suffering for themselves, but not because they want to, not because they want to cause suffering. Like everyone else, they want happiness in their life, but they can't have that happiness because they're creating so much bad karma and doing so many bad things that it's impossible for them to find any happiness. There will be wealthy people without happiness. What would you rather be? Would you rather be a happy person who is not so wealthy? Or would you rather be a super wealthy person with no happiness? That wealth counts for nothing, counts for absolutely nothing unless you have the happiness inside. And these people are on the path of self-destruction. Then we are doing the right thing. Then maybe we can find solutions. We can find solutions that are wholesome. We can find solutions whereby, yes, maybe we march in the street. There's nothing wrong with marching in the street. But if you're going to march in the street, do it to find a good solution, not to be angry, not to use violence, and all of these kind of things. And then you're doing it in the right way. So this is the first thing to always take into account. Never lose your Buddhist principles. Never think about Buddhism in the wrong way here. I don't know about you, but I found it so disheartening sometimes. You know, we not so long ago we had in Burma we had all the problems with the Rohingyas, the Muslims in Burma, And then you had some of the monks who were kind of saying some terrible things about how, we need to support Buddhism and we need to get rid of these Muslims because they destroy the Buddhist environment or the Buddhist country or whatever. But that is not how you support Buddhism. You don't support Buddhism by getting rid of other people, by these kind of political bad actions or whatever it might be. The way to support Buddhism, the way we make the world see that Buddhism is a good religion, is by living Buddhist principles. That is the right way. So if we are going to identify as Buddhist, don't just identify as a Buddhist, identify as a practicing Buddhist. That is the real identity here. If you just identify as a Buddhist and you think being a Buddhist itself is a very good thing here, well, then you're going to do bad things in the name of Buddhism, because Buddhism itself is important. But if you identify as a practicing Buddhist, someone who is kind, someone who cares, someone who is not violent, someone who doesn't do bad things, well, then that identity is going to ensure that you live in a good way. That is a positive way of using this problem of identity that we all have. Then you are on the right track, and then you will actually live in the right way as a consequence. So this is the first thing always to remember, how we react to these problems. React with compassion everywhere, because there's so much suffering when these things happen. When you see the war in Ukraine, there's no need to get angry with the Russian army. The Russian army, the soldiers in that army, they don't know what they are doing here. They're being sent out by the generals and by the government, and often they're just young men. They're very young, like 19 or 20 years old. They're barely out of school, and they have no idea what is going on. They don't really understand this. They don't really want to kill anyone. By some accident, they got into the armed forces, and now they have to do all these terrible things. So have compassion for the invaders. Have compassion for the Russian army. Have compassion even for the generals in the army, because even the generals, they are also trapped in a certain way by a system that is much larger than they are. And in the final analysis, you even have to have compassion for the leaders of the countries. I don't know how you think about someone like Vladimir Putin, but even if you don't like him, many people don't like him these days, then he too is actually deserving of compassion, because what he's doing is terrible. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He too is walking in darkness, just like most people are. So compassion is always the right answer in times of difficulty. Then, when we come together in the right way, then it is possible for us to find good solutions to the problems around us. Anger is never going to help, because anger is going to distort our mind and lead us down the garden path, lead us to solutions that are not sustainable. In fact, solutions that very often turn to be counterproductive, like violence or whatever. So that is the first part that you need to reflect on in this kind of situation. But the second part is really the more profound aspect of when the world goes really wrong. And a story that I've been telling a lot over the last maybe couple of years or whatever, and I may have told it, you may have heard this story before, but it's a very beautiful and powerful story, because it says something about the power of looking at the world in the right way, understanding the world in the right way, how to think about things in a way that actually encourages spirituality and discourages us from looking at the world through the wrong kind of telescope, understanding how spiritual qualities, in fact, are much more important in life than all the worldly stuff around us. And this story was a story during the Second World War in Norway. And soon after the Second World War, there was a man who wrote a book about his experience of the Second World War. And the Second World War in Norway wasn't very heavily bombed or anything like that. Of course, there were problems, but nothing very, very serious in Norway. Still, there was plenty bad enough. Thousands of people were killed. There was a lot of material destructions. The Germans, of course, took over the Norwegian government and ran Norway, and all of these kind of things. So it was a time of great difficulty. The food was being rationed. There wasn't enough food for everyone because Norway relies on imports. Very difficult to get imports during the war. There wasn't enough clothes to go around. And generally, there was a lot of hardship in Norway at that time. But then this man who wrote this book, who had lived in Norway during the Second World War, he said there was something very strange that happened during this war. And the strange thing is that happened during the war was that people were actually more happy during the war than they had been beforehand. Before the war, when everything was okay, there was enough food, there was enough clothes, everything was reasonably good. Well, people were just going about their lives and they were just average. You know what an average life is like? It isn't necessarily very happy. But then during the war, he said, a transformation happened. It was as if people got together. People had more compassion for each other. People had more understanding. They had more sympathy. They worked together as a team. It is as if the war awakened the spiritual qualities within. And even though the external world was very difficult, even though the external world was actually very, very problematic, because the spiritual qualities within were awakened by the warring actions in Norway, people were actually more happy than they were before the war. And it's one of those paradoxes, one of those strange things in our society, that somehow it is possible to be more happy in difficult times than it is in good times. And one of the things that comes out of that, one of the understandings that arises out of this, is that actually the spiritual happiness that we have in our life is far more significant for how we feel than the material happiness. You can be a really wealthy person, but if you have no inner happiness, it means almost nothing. But if you have a very rich and beautiful and good inner life, external world almost doesn't matter at all. Anything that happens in the world outside is almost irrelevant. And that is a very clear pointer, to what it is that we have to do now. It is a very clear pointer for what actually matters in life. So every time we have these difficulties like we have in the world right now, whether it is in Ukraine, whether it is in Sri Lanka, whether it is anywhere, we need to just remember these things, that the real happiness is to be found on the spiritual path. The external world actually doesn't matter all that much. If we can move and shift our understanding, have more compassion for the society around us, start to live together with compassion. Okay, we have a problem we have to solve together. Let's work on this together. Let's bond together as human beings who care for each other. Then you can actually create something very powerful and very beautiful out of that. And then your life starts to take a new direction. The direction of the Dhamma, the direction of kindness, the direction of care, the direction of generosity, the direction of being more peaceful, the direction of being less interested in the world, because you understand that that world will never, ever give you what you're interested in. Then things start to come together in a very beautiful way. The problem in life, one of the problems in the life, is that we are afraid of things we need not be afraid of. And we are not afraid of the things we should be afraid of. We are afraid of the economic disasters in the world. We are afraid of the natural disasters. We are afraid of the terrorists. We are afraid of the wars. We are afraid of the refugees. We are afraid of all the things that can go wrong in our life. We are afraid of people dying, getting sick. These are the things we are afraid of. But this is the world. We have no control over the world. We have to let go. There's no point in being afraid of these things. And even if these things happen, they don't necessarily have that much impact on us anyway. Yes, we have to die ultimately. Yes, the world is sometimes going to go well, sometimes going to go down, but eventually you have to die. Eventually you have to leave everything behind. So what is the big deal? It is only for a short period of time, if anything. And so you start to see what you really should be afraid of, but which most people are not afraid of enough. That is the spiritual qualities that you have. Are you afraid of speaking in the wrong way? Are you afraid of acting in the wrong way? Are you afraid of thinking with an impure heart? If you are afraid of that, then you are afraid of the right thing, because that is what actually secures your long-term happiness and avoids the long-term suffering. You need to be afraid of the right things in this world. And when we are afraid of the right things in this world, then things start to happen, then things start to change, and we actually are building up a future that really is for the long term. So this is how you need to think in these circumstances. Remember, vaya Dhamma Sankhara. It is such a powerful thing. This is the nature of the world. Don't seek for happiness in a place that can never give rise to that happiness. This is all about right view. Looking at the world in the right way. Thinking about the world in a way that aligns with the way that the Buddha thought about the world. Right view comes down to some very simple truths. One of the things that right view, one way of summarizing the idea of right view, very simple way of summarizing it, is to understand where happiness is and to understand where suffering is. We think that happiness is in one place when it actually is suffering. And we think that suffering is in one place when maybe it is actually happiness. Usually we get it upside down. So the proper way of understanding the right view of the Buddha is just simply understanding where happiness is to be found and where suffering is to be found. And when we understand that, we can pursue the right kind of happiness and we can avoid the suffering in our life. This is all about right view, understanding these things. So pursue the spiritual practice that gives rise to real happiness. It gives rise to a thing that is long-lasting. It's going to happen, go with you for a very long time. And if you are a fortunate person, if you are able to pursue that spiritual practice really, really a long way, yeah, then maybe you can even gain some of the very deep and beautiful results on the Buddhist path as a consequence. So this is the right way to think about the problems that you have now in Sri Lanka. I want to just finish off just by talking a little bit about one of the suttas in the Sutta Nipata, which touches on some of these subjects, because I think it's always very useful to come back to the suttas and come back to the word of the Buddha. It's easy to talk, but when we bring in the word of the Buddha, it gives a dimension and a power and a depth to these teachings that sometimes may be hard to get otherwise. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and hopefully you'll be able to see what is going on. Is it possible to allow me to share my screen here?
Go ahead, Bhante.
Thank you. So here we have, this is a sutta, a well-known sutta called the Jara Sutta in the Sutta Nipata. This is the Atthakavagga, very famous chapter in the Sutta Nipata. And so this is about old age, but it really is about the idea of impermanence, yeah? About the sort of things that we are talking about now. So this is the Buddha talking about these issues. And what he says, short, alas, is this life. You die before 100 years. Even if you live a little longer, you still die of old age. People grieve over belongings. Yet there is no such thing as permanent possessions. Separation is a fact of life. When you see this, you wouldn't stay living at home. Whatever a person thinks of as belonging to them, that too is given up when they die. Knowing this, an astute follower of mine would not be interested in ownership. Just as upon waking up, a person does not see what they encountered in a dream, so too you do not see your loved ones when you are dead and gone. You used to see and hear those folk and call them by their name, yet the name is all that is left to tell of a person when they are gone. Those who are greedy for belongings don't give up sorrow, lamentation, and stinginess. That is why the sages, the seers of safety, left possessions behind and wandered. For a mendicant who lives withdrawn, sitting in secluded places, they say it's fitting not to show themselves in a house. The sage is independent everywhere. They don't have likes and dislikes. Lamentations and stinginess slip off them like water from a leaf. Like droplet slips from a lotus leaf, like water from a lotus flower, the sage doesn't cling to that which is seen or heard or thought. For the one who is cleansed does not conceive in terms of things seen, heard, or thought. They do not wish to be purified by another. They are acting neither for passion nor for dispassion. So there is the Jara Sutta for you, the Old Age Sutta. And as with so many of the Buddhist suttas, it is full of beautiful content. And I will just give you some brief ideas about what the content is, because we haven't got that much time, but just to go through it a little bit because of the power of some of these verses. And the first verse here, of course, is all about how short life is. And of course, we're always told about that life is so short. If you ask people who are old, or very old, or whatever it might be, they will tell you it all goes so fast. It disappears so quickly. And so it is what that means, of course, is that we need to grasp the moment now. Now is the time to do the right thing here. And it's not just that life is short. It is not just that we die of old age, but it's the idea that death is always a present possibility here. Death is always around the corner, And this is one of the things I think that is so shocking when we have economic problems, when we have wars going on in Ukraine, when we have all of these things happening in the world. It shocks us a little bit because it reminds us of our mortality here. It reminds us how vulnerable we are, how easily things can go wrong here. And so for this reason, it is also like a little bit of a death contemplation. The idea that we never know how much time we have. We never know what illnesses are lurking in our body, waiting to come out. And it means that there's only one time to live well. There's only one time to be kind. And that time is not next year. It is not even tomorrow. It is not even in 1 minute. It is now, right in this moment, is the only time you can really be kind. Have a kind thought. Have a kind understanding. Send a thought of metta to someone. Now is the time to do that. When I speak to you now, am I speaking with kindness? Am I speaking in the right way? I hope so. If I'm not, I only have myself to blame, and I have to kind of change, because now is the time to be kinder. So this idea, again, using the present situation in the world to remind you how vulnerable we are, how easy things can go wrong. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. Sometimes I might think, I live in Australia. I'm okay in Australia. No, I'm not okay in Australia. It can happen anywhere. This is the problem. And so always remember, there's only one time to be kind. If you don't take it now, you may never take the opportunity at all. People grieve over the belongings, yet there is no such thing as a permanent possession. We cannot hold on to anything in this world. Everything has to go. And this is what the Buddha shows you here, is how powerful this very simple reflection is. Separation is a fact of life. When you see this, you wouldn't stay living at home. So some of these very simple reflections, that seem like, we know that because we have read this many times. Actually, if you take them all the way to the conclusion, they are extraordinarily powerful. These reflections make you become a monastic. That's what the Buddha says here. Why is that? Well, because the reason is because all the things we own, actually, they don't mean very much. we have to give them up very soon anyway, at the very latest when you die. And because you have to give them up, because they don't mean very much, because they are inherently empty, because you can't control them, I will give them up now. And I will live a life instead of just living a life of goodness, a life of spiritual development, a life maybe where I can also help teaching others a little bit, a life where I can do good things, where I can do charity work. And of course, that is really what the monastic life is about. It is about a life of giving and a life of spiritual development. That's all that really matters at the end of the day, when you understand that separation is a fact of life. So, seems simple on the surface, but actually is very profound when you understand what is really going on here. Whatever a person thinks of as belonging to them, that too is given up when they die. Knowing this, an astute follower of mine would not be interested in ownership. Ownership doesn't really make any sense, because you never really own things anyway. You're always just borrowed goods. You have them for a while, and then they have to go back again. Go back to what? Go back to nature. Go back to whatever. They have never really been yours. They never really will belong to anyone. You cannot control the things in your life. Or if you can control them, it's only in a very, very limited sense. Just as upon waking up, a person does not see what they encountered in a dream, so too, you do not see your loved ones when they are dead and gone. And here we have again this beautiful Buddhist idea of the simile of the dream. Yeah, the dream is like life goes by almost as if it is a dream. Is that all the things that we are trying to hold on to in this world? And of course, people are some of the things that are most dear to us, because the connections that we have to other people are very powerful. They're very emotional. And that is why death and dying is such a difficult thing in human life. So, but really, it is all as if it is in a dream. Yeah, when someone has died, when you have moved to a different place and things have changed, the past almost becomes unreal in a certain way. I don't know if you have noticed this in your own life, but I notice this sometimes, even now in the monastery here. Just recently, we have finished building some new kutis in the monastery. And I remember seeing the forest beforehand. And the forest was really, wow, this is a really nice piece of forest. It would be great to have some kutis here. And then we start the building process. And of course, in the building process, you have to cut down some trees, you have to clear some areas, you have to flatten it out to make it suitable for building. Then you build the foundations, then you build the kutis, then you build the walking path. We have this really nice kutis here with beautiful walking paths and everything. For those of you who might have seen them perhaps when you were here. And then I look at it when it's finished, and now it's almost finished. And I say to myself, I can't even remember what it was like before. I can't even imagine anymore what the forest was like before we started building. It is so changed. Or you can see the same thing maybe in the city. In the city is always changing, new buildings coming up. And if you've been away from a place for, say, a few decades, when you come back again, it's hard to recognize. The past seems like a dream. And the question is, did it ever really exist at all? Or was it hollow? Was it empty? Didn't it really have any real meaning? When I go back to Norway and I visit some of the places I used to live as a child, and I think, oh, I used to be attached to this house. The house is still there. I used to be attached to this. Now it's like I have no emotional connection at all to this place. I used to know everyone in the street. We used to play in the street together, football and all of these kind of things. Now there is no one left of those people at all. How is it possible that I was attached to this when it is so empty in so many ways? And then I start to reflect, well, actually, if I go back to a past life, yeah, even further back in time, of course, in the past life, I would also have been attached. Maybe I had a wife in a past life. Maybe I had children. Maybe I had a house. I don't know what I was in a past life. I think maybe I was a monk, but who knows? Maybe I was a nun. It's all very uncertain. But I would have been attached to those things even in a past life. But now it is all gone. I have no idea about it anymore. Everything is like not even a dream. It's a dream that is completely forgotten. There's nothing remaining at all. And in a future life, when I look back at the life I have now, or the life you have now, in a future life, when you look back at your present life, it will seem irrelevant. All the attachments that we had, yeah, it seems like a dream, or even less than a dream. It's like you have woken up to a certain reality, a different way of seeing things. And when you think like this, when you see the world as a dream, you see things coming and going, and then you understand what we are attaching to is a dream. It's a temporary thing that is always fading away. And when you start to see the world in that way, as a dream, as borrowed goods, as something you cannot grasp, yeah, you start to detach a little bit. You start to understand the world in a new way. Just as when you see the violence in the world, when you see the suffering of a bad economy, as you see a war, this too has this ability of helping you to let go a little bit. And when you let go more of the world, that is where the spiritual path starts to happen. That is where your meditation becomes possible, because you understand the world just isn't that interesting. Instead, let me rejoice in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. Let me rejoice in the Kalyanamitas that I have. Let me rejoice in the own goodness in my own life. And then you build up the throwing out of those things that are no good and useless. And you build up those things that will take you forward into the future. You used to see and hear those folk and call them by their name. Yet the name, it is all that is left to tell of a person when they're gone. Those who are greedy for belongings, they don't give up the sorrow, lamentation, and stinginess. That is why the sages, the seers of safety, left possessions behind and wandered. If you are greedy for belongings, that is when you have sorrow and lamentation. It's kind of powerful, isn't it? It is so opposite of how most people think. That is where the sorrow and lamentation come from. And not only that, but if you are greedy for belongings, you are stingy. And stinginess is a painful way of living. Because stinginess is this feeling that I am here in my little world. I want to hold on to my things so no one takes what belongs to me. And when you have that feeling of stinginess, it's like me against the world. The world becomes dangerous. Yeah, and this is a very painful way of living. So the opposite, of course, is to be generous, is to want to share with the world around us, to be helpful to the best way we can, to have compassion for the world, to allow our heart to open up to the world. And when you have a heart that opens up to the world, then you feel so much better than when you live in your own little narrow kind of existence. It's like you embrace the world, you embrace other people, you have a large mind. You don't have a narrow and confined mind in this way. And so the sages, therefore, they, seeing safety, seeing a place of refuge, they leave possessions behind and wandered. So I think I will stop there. The last verses, if you wish, you can have another look for yourself, but it's basically more of the same. And it ends up with a few verses that talks about here the sage that is independent everywhere, with no likes or dislikes. Lamentation and stinginess slip off them like water from a leaf. Beautiful verses, and I'm sure you can understand, at least in part, what they mean. Like a droplet slips from a lotus leaf, like water from a lotus flower. The sage doesn't cling to that which is seen, heard, or thought. The sage doesn't cling to anything in the whole world. There's no clinging, because clinging is a problem. For the one who is cleansed, the arahant, he does not conceive in terms of things seen, heard, or thought. In other words, he doesn't crave. He doesn't see an I am. He doesn't have any views in terms of all the things in the world, the seen, the heard, and the thought. They do not wish to be purified by another Why? Because they are independent in the Dhamma. And when you are independent in the Dhamma and you know the Dhamma, there's no need to seek for anything outside. They're acting neither for passion nor for dispassion. In other words, they are no longer building up things. They're no longer trying to own things in the world or to have things in the world. There is no passion for the things of the world. But nor is there dispassion, because when you are an arahant, you're no longer trying to get rid of suffering. You have achieved the goal of the path. You are at peace, acting neither for this nor for that, but fully at peace with what you have. All right, so there you are, a little bit of a quick going through at the end there. But now, if you wish, Rohanta, we can do a little bit of questions.
Yes, yes, thank you very much, Bhante. It was a very nice talk. Sadhu, sadhu. We have a few questions. The first one is directly related to what you just spoke. It goes as, it is very hard to have a kind thought to those in power who have deliberately robbed for the poor people. Please advise.
Yes, it is very hard. And what is very hard is usually worth doing. So please do what is very hard. So the idea is to remember, sometimes you cannot have metta. It is not necessarily about having metta towards people in power who you feel have done the wrong thing. But what it is about having compassion for them. Yeah, that is kind of what we can do. And this is all really about understanding the Dhamma in the right way, to understand that the Dhamma ultimately is about understanding that we are all trapped in this world. Yeah, everyone has basically the same problem. It is not about just you and me, but the people in power. And when they do bad things towards others, they are creating tremendous suffering for themselves. Yeah, imagine, okay, the poor people in Sri Lanka or whatever, anywhere in the world who are getting a hard time when the economy is going down and is going very difficult, they will have problems for a while. Yeah, they will maybe suffer through a while, but if they have a good heart, if they live according to the Buddhist principles, and I'm sure many poor people will have very good hearts, in the long run, they will still be okay. In the long run, they will have success because they are doing the things that lead to long run happiness. But the people in power, they are creating enormous bad karma for themselves. Yeah, they're creating a mind that is dark and very unpleasant to be in. Right here in this life, they very likely will suffer enormously. And because of that, because they don't really understand, because they are deluded, because they think they are creating happiness, at least for themselves, but probably for others as well, when actually they are creating suffering, you realize how deluded they are, how they are walking in darkness. How can you be angry by someone who is walking in darkness? How can you be angry with someone who thinks they are creating happiness? They're actually creating suffering in the world. So the idea is to try to understand the bigger picture, to stand back a little bit, not to get too close to these kind of things, and understand we are all victims. Everyone is a victim in this way. And when you understand that everyone is a victim, then you can have more compassion. And then you can also see that there's still many good things happening at the same time. So you can see the good things happening in our society, and you can rejoice in that. And then you can have compassion for the bad actions that are happening in our world. So you need to take the Buddhist idea of anatta, anatman, yeah, the idea of non-self, very, very seriously, because this guides you to understand how even the most bad people in the world, how you can have compassion for them, even the mass murderers, anyone really.
Thank you, Bhante. The next question, dear Ajahn, thank you for the compassion you have for us. My question is, whenever I try to let go in meditation, that is to focus on breath, I find myself thinking of Dhamma, like, why should I let go the outside world, etc. This leads to thinking. Kindly please advise. And there's a PS saying, looking forward to the workshop on Samma Samadhi.
Okay. So you have to you start thinking about Dhamma, why you should let go of the world outside. This actually is interesting because in one of the suttas, the Buddha says that Dhamma vitaka, thinking about the Dhamma, is actually one of the hindrances. But he does say it is quite a refined hindrance. If that is the only hindrance you have, you're probably doing quite well. The biggest hindrance is always thinking about the world, really thinking about the world and getting drawn into your problems in your life, or thinking about what you're going to do in your job, or how you're going to look after your family, or whatever it is, your house or whatever. This is the biggest problem of all. But if you're thinking about Dhamma, if you're thinking about why you should give up those thoughts, then quickly just understand why it is that you have to give them up. Basically, you have to give it up because it is not going to get you anywhere. It doesn't lead to any solution. And if you can think about Dhamma very briefly like that, then hopefully, if your understanding is good enough, you can let go even of the thought of the Dhamma, because it will have done its job. It will have resolved the issue. You are no longer thinking about the world. So allow the Dhamma thought to resolve the issue. And when the issue is resolved, you know that you're no longer thinking about these things, then you can let go of everything, the world, and also the thinking about the Dhamma itself. So come back. Sometimes the Dhamma thought, the best way to deal with that is just to come back to the breath. Realize that, okay, I will think about the Dhamma later on. Now is the time to let go. Come back to the breath. Bring yourself back very gently, Don't use too much willpower. It's almost like you allow the breath to arise by itself. And then the Dhamma vitaka will, hopefully, if you keep on doing that, it will fade away into the background.
Thank you, Bhante. The next question. Thank you, Bhante, for a relevant and rich talk. The challenge for the householder is to use the benefits of the spiritual path, like compassion and generosity, to help others in the world as much as ourselves. Otherwise, the spiritual path alone may itself be selfish. It's kind of a question. Will it be can it be considered as only selfish? The Buddha spent his life helping people by teaching and educating the people with less to reduce suffering by understanding the reality. Finding the balance between spiritual and worldly goodness is our challenge. Thanks for helping us find this balance between spiritual and worldly engagement. Thank you.
Okay, sure. First of all, I just want to talk about the idea of being selfish on the spiritual path. I don't think there is such a thing as selfishness on the spiritual path. If you live the spiritual life well, then it is good. It is a positive thing. Even if you do meditation, let's say you go on meditation retreat or you do that for a while, it is not really selfish, because what you're doing is that you are building up the good qualities inside. And building up the good qualities within is what we need in the world. We need people who have good qualities. So by doing this, you're actually doing something very positive for society, because those qualities that you build up in meditation, you bring back again out into the world. And other people will benefit if you are more balanced, if you are more kind, if you are a more caring person. So these are not things that remain within us. We bring them back out again into society later on. So there isn't really, you just do what is right. Of course, when you have to interact with the world, and you have to interact with the world, then you do that with kindness. But it is not as if there is any kind of real dichotomy or division between the spiritual path on the one hand and the worldly life on the other. They have to be integrated with each other. So when you deal with the world, you deal with the world with kindness. And then when you go on a retreat, and please go on a retreat every now and again, please do a bit of meditation just to keep yourself in good balance and in good stead. And as you do that, you kind of also ensure that your inner life is balanced as well. And when your inner life is balanced, your agency in the world will be much more powerful. You'll be able to do things in the world in a much better way. So regardless of what you do, as long as you do things with a spiritual point of view, as long as you do things with kindness, you can never really go wrong. And it doesn't matter so much whether you are more on the worldly side or more on the retreat side. It doesn't really matter so much as long as you live well.
Thank you, Bhante. The next one is related to essentially following precepts. So the question is essentially sometimes you may have very little choice in keeping the precepts in 100% because of the kind of job one may do. Say, for example, the building manager has to make sure the pest control happens. I mean, he or she may not kill directly, but at the end of the day, they may have to hire one, to keep the buildings clean, whatever. And the same goes here, says for serving of alcohol if you're in the hospitality business. So how do you handle that is the question.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, life is never perfect. Life is always about compromises to some extent. It's very, very difficult to live a completely perfect life. Even as a monk, you cannot always live a perfect life. Yeah, there are small little things that you may have to do that are not ideal. Yeah, and I mean, what can you do if you live in a monastery in Australia and the government comes and says we're going to shut down the monastery unless you do something with the insects in your kitchen, because kitchens are supposed to be very clean? Well, sometimes you have no choice but to do things that actually goes against the precepts. So it happens very, very rarely, but that is some of the conflict and dilemmas of life. So your point is to minimize these kind of things. Yeah, this is really what you should try to do. And so you have to ask yourself, well, if you are in the hospitality industry, well, it depends on what kind of hospitality. If you're working in a bar and you're serving people alcohol all day long, well, that is maybe not such a good idea. Yeah, maybe then you should look out, see if you can find another job. If you cannot find another job and you have to feed your family, you have to feed yourself, then stay as long as you can, as long as you have to. But then when you can, then you find yourself another job. So you try your very best. Yeah, you try your best to move to a livelihood, a way of living that is better. In the meantime, because you have to function in a certain way, you have to be practical, you have to pay your bills, okay, you carry on. But you're always looking for new ways of doing things. And it's interesting, I don't know, but I mean, very often you can find ways around things. Yeah, usually there are ways of dealing with issues and little things that you can do to stop things from happening. I'm just thinking about now. I have one of the problems in our monastery. We have termites in our monastery here, and sometimes the termites, they come into our kutis and they start eating all the delicious Australian wood inside the kutis. Australian wood, very, very delicious for termites. That's what the termites think. And so you try to find ways, and you try to find ways of kind of encouraging the termites to retreat a little bit, yeah, not to kind of take over the whole kuti. Yeah. And of course, there are ways of doing that. And I have myself, even though I've had termites in my kuti for 10 years, I'm able to keep them in check just by natural means, by using strong odors and these kind of things. And it kind of keeps them back. Yeah. So it's a matter of, sometimes it's just a matter of using one's imagination, yeah, and then trying slowly, gradually, whenever the opportunity arises, to then have the best possible livelihood. And then, so be practical, use your imagination, and in the long term, if you can change your job.